If you and another person were taken to a room and it only had two chairs and a single light in the middle, and the man on the radio asked you to tell him what makes you different from the person across the room, what would you say? Well, you would obviously be wearing different clothes, so you could point to the difference in fashion, or perhaps their hair is longer than yours, or they're simply shorter than you. But that difference is clear. But what if the man on the radio had the two of you blindfolded before you entered the room, so now you can't see each other, you don't know what the other person looks like, and he asks you to tell him the difference between you and the person across the room? What would you say then, without a surface to cling to? So that is something new that we're going to do with the videos. We are going to try to put in some introductions because I think mainly two reasons. Number one, it makes it easier for me to turn these into shorts. And number two, I think it's just more exciting and more entertaining for me to do that because it gets you questions to ask about in the video and to check me on them if I don't answer them properly. But you've read the title, you've seen the thumbnail. We're going to talk about that classical saying or this classical bit of advice and upliftment when you really need someone to pick you up for whatever reason to work towards a goal, and they tell you that, hey, you're different to other people, you're unique, you're special, and you should appreciate yourself because of that. And I think to some extent we all know that we're special, we all know that we're unique, but not all of us knows what makes us unique. Not everyone can dig down deep, look within themselves and say, yes, I know I'm different, I know that I'm unique, but what actually makes me unique to the person next to me aside from my looks and my appeals? And aside from the mathematical fact that one person cannot be born to be exactly the same as another person and live a life that is exactly the same as another person. So a few things we're going to touch on. The first one being that I think to some extent we all understand the surface and the basic logic of what that means. I mean, I've just explained it. The mathematics says so. If I'm born at 6 o'clock, even if you're born at the exact same time as me, in the exact same hospital, we're not born from the same mother, we're not born from the same father, and we're not going to have the same name and surname. So already there's some bit of deviation between you and me as a person. And even beyond that, when you look at just when we grow up, if we're in the same school, we have a different name, we do different subjects, and we get different grades in our tests and things like that. So there's that level of uniqueness and just the surface level is what I call it, because these are things that you can easily see, you can easily notice, and you can easily read. These are things that when we have regular conversation about, it's something that's so obvious that we don't even really mention it. But what we want to talk about today is that it's very rare for us to go beyond that surface, to go beyond that saying and really look and figure out what makes us different to another person. Now, there are reasons behind why this is the case. One of my favorite reasons to cling to is because we live in a world where it's so easy to get distracted from asking questions deeper than the surface. Also, mainly because the world just moves so quickly for some of us. We don't really have the time to just stop and wonder and think about why is something the way that it is. And if you've watched my other videos on philosophy, then you'll understand why I think it's important that we stop doing that and we actually just start being more inquisitive about things. But that's one thing that could be causing us to not do that. And it's important that we do that because self-introspection is the best way we get to figure out what makes us so unique and what makes us so different. Yeah, it's tough, it's hard. I mean, sometimes when we look at things, we do need an answer quickly. We need an answer instantly. Something is a laptop. I know it's a laptop. I don't have to ask why it was made to be a laptop, how it became this and that. I need a laptop. I need to see it's a laptop. It's a laptop. Any other details will probably be about what are the specs, what are the RAM and things like that. And then I'll be able to figure out that this would be a good laptop for me. But one of the questions I want to pose in this video is why can't we do that for ourselves? We're a human being and we need ourselves to be a human being, just for the sake of example. But there are different things about us. What's our RAM? What's our SSD size? What makes us unique? How do we learn things? How do we speak to people? What kind of conversations do we like having? What have we experienced in our lives and what can we remember regarding those experiences that have gotten us as close to a sense of pure happiness as possible? Because these are the things that really promote the idea of noting down and noticing this is what makes me who I am. These are the things that we need to cling to and we need to really think about to be able to figure out, to get as close as possible to that real person that we are behind the saying and behind the surface. Because when it comes down to it, it comes down to another point in the video that I want to make, and that is that the best way to figure out how unique we are deep down is to just pay attention to ourselves. This is the part of the video where I can give more of a personal story or more of a personal opinion, in the sense that I've always hated the idea of just going around in various different social medias. To be honest, I wouldn't really be using YouTube so heavily if I didn't enjoy the idea and possibility of learning things from other people, and also just because I just like content creation, and YouTube was and still is, to my opinion, the best platform to do content creation. But if you're asking me, would I get TikTok, would I get Instagram and things like that, I always say no. I don't like things like that because they distract me from being able to pay attention to what happens in a day. I've had this conversation with people about how memories and our perception of time really depend on what we can remember. Actually, let me just say our perception of time depends on what we can remember in a day, and that relies on how many things happened in the day. If you had a day where you just looked at your phone and you just scrolled on Instagram Reels and you scrolled on TikToks the whole day, that day is going to feel like it lasted an hour. And that's even if you can remember an hour worth of what you were scrolling on. But if you had a day where you woke up in the morning, you went to school, you did this in a lecture, something crazy happened, and you came back home and you had to cook for yourself, and then after cooking you tasted your food, it tasted amazing, and then after that you went outside, you played football with your friends in the streets, that day is a lot more packed with things, and it's going to feel a lot longer than a day would have where you were just sitting around in front of a TV or a screen. So my idea behind that is that social media just makes it a lot harder for me to pay attention and focus on things like that, and focus on days like that, because I need to focus on days like that, and I think we all need to focus on days like that to figure out who we really are, what makes us tick. Like I was saying in earlier paragraphs or an earlier minute, what makes us tick? How do we learn differently? What makes us happy? What makes us uniquely happy? Not only down to just not being distracted by social media and constant scrolling, but also just down to being able to put the phone down sometimes, put down maybe anxiety in some places wherever we can, and just try new things. Like the other day was the first time I tried to do go-karting, but not like regular go-karting. I was in the steering wheel, I was driving, and someone was pushing me at the back, but I still had to steer. And it was a bit nerve-wracking because if I didn't steer properly, we were literally going to flip over. But that was something new, and now that's something I can speak about. And because of that experience, I realized how much I enjoyed the feeling of moving fast. I realized how much I enjoyed the feeling of just being able to just focus on the task at hand, because keeping this car straight was really hard. It needed a lot of focus. But had I not gotten that experience, had I not been able to go out and explore and pay attention to myself, I would not be able to say that. I would not be able to say I enjoy the thrill of going fast and the thrill of being locked in and focused. Even when it comes to more important decisions like the degree I do or the things that I wanted to study, if I wasn't able to pay attention to, I realized that I like numbers a lot. And to be more specific, to say, I like numbers, but I'm not a big fan of the theoretical side of the numbers, but I like what we can do with them and how we can play with them as if it were a video game. If I didn't have that epiphany, if I didn't pay attention and have that epiphany, I wouldn't be here, and maybe my life isn't a lot more of a uncertain and more confused state. So if you're going to ask me, if you really want to figure out what makes you different to another person and what makes you so unique, you need to have a life where you're paying attention, you're not getting distracted too often, you just look at every single day whenever you can. You don't have to be too OCD-esque about it, but just so long as you're checking in to be like, hey, I did this today, I did that today. When I think about what makes me happy, I think about this and that, because sometimes it does take time and it might be a lot harder for some people than it is for others. But the important thing is we need to be able to do that, because once we're able to do that, it leads into something that I did speak about as well in a previous video. And it's the idea that when we understand ourselves a lot better, we will be more efficient at solving problems in our lives, but also it's going to be a lot more effective for us to look for information outside of ourselves. Because now when we get that information outside of ourselves, we won't treat it as a one-size-fits-all kind of case, but we will be able to look at it critically and think about, how does this information help my life, and how can I incorporate my own life and my own characteristics to be able to make this information work for me. And I think that can only really happen if you know who you are. I'm not saying you should have a perfect perception of yourself, but at the same time, the closer we can get to that, the better. That's what I'm trying to aim for, and I think that's what we should all aim for. But what I'm trying to say is that I wouldn't expect you to have it a day after realizing that, I should find out more about myself. But what I'm saying is that the better that you know about yourself, the easier it is for you to receive advice, for you to counteract advice that's not going to be good for you, and overall, the easier it will be for you to be able to pursue your goals, for you to be able to carve out a life that you will be satisfied with in the end. Again, I made a really long and impactful video about the ins and outs of doing that and why it becomes a problem when you try to look for advice online and you do that without really knowing yourself and without really knowing what makes you tick. If you are interested in that video, I will link it down below. But when we come back to the topic of today, we all know that we're different, but we don't know why we're different. I just think it's down to us not being able to pay attention to ourselves for numerous amount of reasons, whether it be the idea that we're so engrossed and integrated into a fast-paced world that we don't have time to think about things beyond the surface. We don't have time to think about what makes me so different to another person beyond the surface. And also in the case that sometimes, and there's no shame about it, we didn't really get the chance to learn how to do that. No one's perfect at it. I'm not perfect at it either. I only just started learning philosophy and reading philosophy. But I can definitely say that the sooner that you start when you try to learn something like that, the better, because you get to incorporate it a lot sooner. And beyond that as well, sometimes it's a lot harder for us to figure out who we are because like I said, we get engrossed into a very fast-paced world where distractions are everywhere. But it doesn't change the fact that it's our due diligence and for the life that we want, to get as close to a satisfactory life for ourselves as possible, we need to think about it deep down. We need to take time and pay attention to our own lives and figure out, why do we enjoy the things that we enjoy? What makes me so different in my efficiency compared to another person? Maybe past papers work well for me, but something else works well for another person. What works well for me? And I think the sooner that we can figure that out, the easier it's going to be for us to really progress in our lives, to build up in our lives, and just to keep it very simple, the easier it will be for us to live happier lives. I can attest to it because as soon as I did this, as soon as I paid attention to myself and figured out what made me tick compared to other people, what made me uniquely wake up in the morning, be passionate about specific things and how I work towards my results, it made it a lot easier for me to achieve those results and just generally a lot easier for me to be happy. But in any case, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you did enjoy the video. I hope you did find value. And once more, if you want to really figure out in more depth why knowing yourself makes it so easier for you to get unstuck in life, then please do watch the video that's going to be recommended. Until then though, I'll see you.